So, public budgeting is my passion. It's where I've spent the last 26 years of my life. I spent the last 8 years in Salt Lake County. Prior to that, I was 8 years as the in-house trainer for the Utah League of Cities and Towns. I visited many of your counties, working with your municipal officials on their budgets. And prior to that, I was in budgeting and finance in Salt Lake County. So a couple of things. To answer the question about the financial advisor, with my hat on at the district, John Bronson is my best friend as my financial advisor. They have done wonderful things for the district, found creative solutions, and they're well worth the money paid. Just in terms of just saving us money on interest rates and helping us as a brand new entity that couldn't find a way to borrow money. Very creative in the approach we came up with to borrow money. So hats off to John and his team on the FA. Also in the public budgeting arena, Jennifer said that if you're an auditor, treasurer, or work with the budget, you'll become her best friend. She gets so tired of my phone calls. I call her and she walks me through the mechanics of a lot of the different things that I've had to learn, moving from just reviewing budgets into actually implementing that budget. And they do a great service. And you've had a great lineup here. So I think, Adam, you told me that because this is my passion, I get them till 4, right, on public budgeting. So are you ready? Strap in? No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no one gets to leave. What John and others tell me is nobody else finds this as exciting as I do, but I hope that by the time I'm done, you will be as excited about public budgeting as I am, and you will be so excited that you will take those books that Gavin did, you will turn to page 90, and tonight you will pour through pages 90 through 98, because people, it doesn't get any better than that, okay? It doesn't get any better. Sure. Thank you, Gavin. And I was going to mention that later, that when you see the timeline, you will see that your community is right now, right smack in the middle of this. And so budgeting is going on in your county right now, and I think Gavin is absolutely correct. Get in there and learn about it. So you can see the agenda that I'm going to fly through. We've got to get through that in 15 minutes, and so strap in. We're going. There is a universal truth about budgets. I will tell you this from the territories I've worked with, from the island nation of Palau that I was in, and Saipan where I'm going next. There is never enough money or staff. Every time I talk to any elected official or to any group that is trying to go through a public budget, they tell me, if only we had more money or if only we had more people, we could do all of this wonderful stuff. I will suggest to you, you can do all of that wonderful stuff that you want to do. You just need to be willing to roll up your sleeves, work hard, and make priorities. And that gets to what we talk about budgeting, and that's why I'm passionate about it. I should be able to pick up your budget, and by looking at your budget, and tell me if you have more than 25,000 in your community, raise your hand. If you have more than 25,000, that's most of you. You should have a narrative that goes with your budget, and we'll talk about that in a minute. From your budget, I should know what your priorities are. That is what your budget is. It is a document for you to talk to the public about what your priorities are, why you ran for office, why you want to be there, what you want to accomplish. Show me the money. I will follow the money and I will know what is important to you. That is where my passion comes from. It is not just a mere accounting document. Anybody, all it takes is a person who can add and subtract, to add a few bucks to last year's numbers and subtract a few here and put out a new thing. To go through a budget means that you talk about what is it you want to accomplish in your community, what are your priorities for your community. This is, in my estimation, the most important thing you will do as a county commission if you're a commissioner. If you're a clerk auditor, putting together that tentative budget, the most important thing that you will do. It is really how you involve the public in the business of running the public's business. It is not scary or boring. I am so glad I'm looking out around you and I'm not seeing a lot of people with droopy eyes, because I hate that when we talk about budgets. Budgets are exciting. It really is your opportunity to interface with the public. I want to spend a few minutes on transparency. And if I don't leave you with anything else during this budget discussion today, I want you to take home the message of transparency. It matters. You need to open your doors, you need to open your meetings, and you need to allow the public in to hear your deliberations about how you want to spend their money. And that's what I want you to keep remembering. It's their money. And when you make these decisions, you say, would I make this decision with my money? It is your money. It's their money. Make sure you're making the decisions that make sense with your and their money. So some transparency tips for you. And if you can't read this, the little public guy is saying, hey, government official, what's going on under there, under the cloak of secrecy? He says, trust us, you don't need to know. That's just not true. You need to open those public meetings. If you're a commission form of government, let me tell you, in Salt Lake County, we morphed from a commission form of government to the 9-member council that Gavin described earlier. My boss was one of the commissioners when it was a 3-member commission. He fondly refers to that as the heady days of the county commission. You could get one more vote and you could do whatever you wanted. And he says that very tongue-in-cheek because he said the process of having 9 council members and having very open public meetings really does invite the public more into the public's business. So if you're a commissioner, you need to be really careful that you're not, out at breakfast or you're out on the golf course and all of a sudden you start talking about those legislative budget functions and the budget issues and make decisions out there outside of view of the public. You need to make sure that the public hears your decisions, hears the discussion, and understands why you got where you are. And then I would encourage you to do a narrative description of the budget. It's very, very disenfranchising for the public to get row after row after row of numbers and try to make heads nor tail of that. Let me tell you, I was in the public budget arena in local government budgets for a lot of years before I came to Salt Lake County government. The first year I sat through a Salt Lake County government session, I felt like they were speaking a foreign language. And this was someone coming, I understood budgets, I knew budgets. It's tough when you first get in there. Ask a lot of questions. Later you're going to see if you don't understand it, you ask more questions and you don't vote for it until you do understand it. Because it shouldn't be mystifying. It should be something that can be put into narrative form so that you, as a newly elected official, and the public can understand what's going on in the budget. Also, do quarterly budget updates. I believe now those are required by state law. You need to have them. Don't just, blithely pass over them when you're having your quarterly update on the agenda. Talk through it. Understand where you are in the year. How far expended are we? Have we brought in the revenue we should have? For example, if you look at your property tax line item and you're halfway through the year and you've brought in 10% of your revenue, are you concerned? No. Most of your revenue is going to come in November. You know that. And you're going to talk to John about how do you pay the bills until we get that revenue. So you start to understand those things. You understand the cyclical nature of the way your revenue comes in or the way that you might spend it. And then have an honest discussion with your public. And some of it is cut the rhetoric. I know Gavin, when I was reading through his budget presentation that's in your book, he calls property tax, I can't remember the word, but it wasn't good. It was reviled, maybe, one of the most reviled taxes, and it is. But it's important for us in local government and in government to start talking to the public about those dollars that you entrust to us are how we provide all of the great services that you receive. And if we're out there complaining about taxes and taxation and we're doing all of that, we're buying into the rhetoric rather than helping to educate the public that these taxes go for a good purpose. It's why we want to live in the communities that we live in because of the way we're spending the dollars. I will end this part with telling you transparency is not a fad. There are lawsuits over transparency issues, as Gavin talked to you about. Every single budgeting seminar I go to, there is session after session after session on transparency. So you're walking into government new. You're walking in, and if you go in and you say, wow, this feels like it's kind of closed and it's not very open, feel free to say, we're going to change that paradigm. We want to open this up and have a more open, honest dialogue with the public about the public's money. This is a basic budget calendar. Just really quickly, you don't need to write it down. This is available on the website. Prepare the tentative budget, that happened before November 1st. That's in most of your communities, that's your clerk auditor in the county that takes care of that. You can see as we go through the process, and that budget needs to be adopted by December 31st. So take Gavin's advice, find out when those meetings are, and start attending. You know, your commission may or may not invite you to sit in a kind of a more official, not voting, but official role. But I know in Salt Lake County, that's what we do with our newly elected officials. Scott is our new assessor this year, or auditor, I'm sorry. We have an auditor who's a CPA, yay us. And he will be able to come up and he will be able to be part of that budget process this year. That's been part of the norm of Salt Lake County, is that we include the newly elected officials. Our council members turn to the newly elected officials and say, do you have any thoughts? You're the one who has to live with this budget next year. Do you have any thoughts about it? So go and I encourage you to get involved. There are a couple of special county requirements. I'm not going to spend the time going through these. They are on the slides. It's in the book that Gavin gave you, and you can just look at it, especially if you're the budget officer and you're preparing the budget. These are a couple things that you need to know. I want to talk for just a minute about what makes our governments a little bit different than private business. How many come from a private business background? Okay, now put your hands down. How many of you have dealt with government budgets before? So pretty new to most of the people in the room. We do fund budgeting. It's pretty simple. A fund is a self-balancing set of numbers. That's all it is. So don't get confused by it. And we'll talk through really quickly what some of the different funds are. But really, it's a way in government for us to have accountability versus profitability. Profit is not our motive in government, but accountability, hence the transparency, is. And then within our funds, we have governmental funds and we have proprietary funds. And let me run through those really quickly. First, we have the general fund and related funds. Major sources of revenue in the general fund are taxes. Jennifer talked about property tax. For most of you, that's the really big tax in that fund. And you don't get most of that revenue until the 11th month of your year. And so it's kind of tricky how you balance that. But there are ways we can. Related funds to the general fund are anything that pull their revenue from the similar sources. And so when you have your auditor talk to you about governmental or general fund and related, that's what they mean. Capital projects fund, again, another self-balancing set of numbers. That's where we put money when we want to do special building projects, basically bricks and mortar. Sometimes you can use it for other kinds of projects, but in general, capital project funds has just your different capital projects. Hint to you, make sure that you're always watching those capital projects within the fund, because a lot of times capital projects will get closed out and people won't go gather all the money that's left over in those budgets. When I was in Salt Lake City working with the Salt Lake City Council, council members were looking for money. We looked at the capital projects fund, went in and scooped out all the leftover money and all of the closed out projects and had $2 million. That the council could either bring down taxes or spend on other priorities within the budget. Debt service funds, John talked to you about issuing debt. I don't need to cover that more. Enterprise funds. These are funds like water, sewer, utilities. Usually your main source of revenue in that fund is a user fee. It runs a little more like a business, an enterprise fund. So those of you who come from a business background, you'll like the enterprise funds in government. You'll understand them. They look a little bit more like a business fund. Internal service funds, those are funds that we use to provide services within our government. In Salt Lake County, for example, we have a fleet internal service fund. So it's a self-balancing set of numbers. It manages all of the fleet in the government, and all of the different entities in the government buy their fleet services from that fleet fund. Okay, so that's how those internal service funds work. We have one for IT, you know, you may have one for employee benefits, those different kinds of things. And then there's a special revenue fund. You may see that in your county like 911 funds. It's when we have a dedicated revenue source that we need to bring it in, and we need to be able to demonstrate to auditors and the public that we didn't spend that money on anything except the purpose for which it was collected. And so 911 is a good example of where you may see a special revenue fund used. Again, a self-balancing set of numbers. Now, to move money within your budget in the mid-year from fund to fund, who can do that? The commission, right. And the reason that's at the commission level is because that is typically going to be a policy shift. You're shifting emphasis in the budget if you're taking money from one fund and moving it to another. Within the general fund itself, you'll have several departments. That's one of those special requirements. The commission also needs to move money between those departments. Those are called appropriation levels, appropriation units. The commission is involved in moving that money between those levels. Fund balance. If you were to ever talk about a profit in government, it would be sort of what we put in our fund balance, and that's our rainy day fund. We, by state statute, are limited as to how much money we can have there. You can't just, you know, raise taxes really high and have a bunch of money sitting there so that you can make extra money on it because we're getting such great returns in that state public treasurer's investment pool. I think it's, John, 0.6% right now. So you can't do that. The state legislature said if you have too much money, you need to lower your tax rate. You can't just hoard money. But there are the limits. You can see it on the screen based on your government and what size budget you have. You can have from 20% up to 50%. But notice there's also a minimum. There's a 5% that once, you know, when you've got your fund balance there, you can't dip below 5% of the fund balance. And in fact, when you're out in the bond market, John and the other financial advisors in town are going to make you have a lot more than 5% to prove your credit worthiness. Yeah, John? So they would call that a best practice. 10% would be a best practice if you want to play in the bond market for ratings. So it's your total general fund revenue for the year. And remember, that's a snapshot in time. It's a one-time snapshot, and then that kind of, you monitor it through the year, but isn't that what you report out is once a year? And this client is not. I will hang my head in shame. The county is. My little district is not. I'm not going to do a lot of focus on revenue. Jennifer talked about property tax. I know that's one of the biggies for the county. None of us get franchise tax, and in our county, because we, at Salt Lake County, we provide municipal services, we lament all of the time that we don't get franchise tax, but that's not likely to change soon. And then you do have your sales tax and some other taxes that you levy. I want to talk for just a minute, and I'm hurrying at them. I'm running through this. I want to talk about expenses for a minute. And you see the librarian there, and Santa says to her, you want a $74,000 for a new employee. Whoa, that's a mighty big wish. I will suggest to you during mid-year, and your mid-year comes in July, so it's Christmas in July, do not grant ongoing requests. Make the bar pretty darn high to give employees mid-year. It's much better to have people come in when everything gets weighed against each other in terms of how are we going to divvy up the ongoing money. Because a new librarian might look like the most important thing in the world when you're sitting at mid-year, but when you're going through the budget cycle and you're setting a new budget, how does it stack up against the request for a new deputy? Might not stack up quite as high. So just a good budget practice is, I will tell you, I've been on the other side. I want to get people at mid-year. If I need a new person, that's when I'm going to ask for it, because I think I can slide it in and it'll weigh up different on the priorities. But I always, and I've told your city councils in your communities this, don't grant ongoing increases mid-year. Set that bar super high to justify it. I want you to stretch your dollars and watch for some natural underexpend. There is something that is really worrying me as somebody who's been in public budgeting for a long time, and it's how we replace employees. And it's not just happening at Salt Lake County, it's happening in the government of Guam, it's happening in the government of Palau, it's happening in all the different governments I'm working with. When we have a long-term tenured employee, and you know that in government, the way that we build salaries is usually over time. We're not great at paying for performance yet, so we build salaries over time. Something has happened, however, and when a long-term employee leaves, they've been there 30 plus years, they leave, we are tending to hire in the replacement at or really seriously close to the salary where the long-term tenured employee left. And I'm getting very concerned because we are losing sort of some operational savings that we in government used to bank on. We used to bank on the fact that as we lose some long-term employees, there's going to be some natural savings as we build that skill and knowledge base again, marching through time until we get the other person to that salary. I'm getting worried about what this means when we're starting to see that trend in a lot of different places. And what really worried me was when Salt Lake County and my boss sat and had to vote for a tax increase, and the next year we came in and put a budget together, and our CFO said, "We're out of money." We just did a tax increase and we're out of money. And we went back and we looked, and in this practice, we had spent millions that we should have had in operational savings just on this turnover of staff. So keep your eye on that as you walk into government new. But also reward departments for saving money. Have your departments each have a one-time wish list. Things that they really need that's a one-time expenditure, and if they save some money, you don't have to give it back to them ongoing. You may have other priorities within the budget, but reward them for their creativity by meeting one of the things off that one-time wish list. And then this one I could talk for hours about. I won't. I'm happy to come to your community and talk to you about it if you want to go here, but begin to focus on outcomes rather than outputs. In government, we are so focused on counting how many times we cycle through something and measuring our cycle time that we forget, are we achieving the outcome that we're after? And please watch Salt Lake County and Mayor Ben McAdams. He is turning Salt Lake County's focus to outcomes. He just put out a request for information to have people come in and give him creative ways to achieve outcomes in some very specific social service areas. So keep an eye on that. It's going to be very interesting, and I know as he rolls that out in Salt Lake County will do whatever we can to help the other counties in Utah roll it out as well. You have some really hard to control expenses within your government, and it's tricky, and just walk in knowing that. Number one is health care. This year, luckily, we have seen lower health care increases than we've seen in years past. Those of you who are coming to government, please know when you look at us and we're having 6 and 7% health insurance increases this year, that is on the heels of 18, 20, 22% increases. We're trying to catch up with the private sector in how we manage those, so don't be flabbergasted at a 7 or an 8. Look at the history of where we've been, and I think we're really doing a good job bringing those down. Retirement expenses, that's a number that will be handed to you from the State Retirement Board, and you get to pay it. This year, luckily, it's 0. So nobody's really seeing an increase. It doesn't mean you're paying 0. It means you're paying 0% more than you paid last year. You get to pay the same number. Fuel, always that one's up and down. This week's a great week. What do they say? It's under $3 a gallon somewhere in the nation. I haven't seen it yet, but somewhere. And then utility costs, and you know what happens with those. Budget creep, we've talked about that a little bit. I want to throw a couple more words out there. Watch out for mid-year employee reclassifications. I know Scott keeps shaking his head yes, because this is like a broken record. We're seeing this. Salt Lake County lost $1.5 million last year to just reclassifying employees mid-year. So make sure that the reclasses are happening and that we're not just inadvertently giving raises and losing money. We've talked about hiring above the entry level. Please talk to your attorneys about the accrual of comp time. Gavin probably could spend a lot of time on this, and once it's accrued, you have to deal with it, you have to pay it, so make sure you've got some pretty tight policies around that. Watch out for grants. It's always great for people to come in and say, we want to write this grant and there's this match, and if you'll make this match. A lot of times once the grant's gone, you have to then pick it up in the general fund. So when you're writing the grant, make sure that you're willing to do that. Make sure you're willing to fund it when the grant goes away. And then OPEB, another one we could spend a long time on. That's the post-employment retirement benefits. And I'm sure, Adam, you're going to have a lot on that later. I don't want to hit them with too much of it right now. It'll scare them out. They'll run and resign before they take office. Okay, so we talked about if you don't understand it, keep asking questions until you do. Become a quality-focused organization. And I really would challenge you walking in to walk in with some of those ideas that you want to change some of those things. You want to be focused on quality. Be creative, test new ideas. I love local government. There is no way you could ever get me to work for federal government. Sorry, Jenny, I probably would never work for the state either. I love local government, and it's because we're laboratories. We can test things. Counties, cities, we get to test things. So be creative and try to do it, and don't be afraid to educate the public about the true cost of the services. Because remember, if you're never capturing inflation, then you're really cutting services every year. It's just that easy. If you're never willing to bring in more revenue to capture inflation, just like in your home budget, you're cutting. You're cutting back every single year if you're not willing to do it. If you have any more questions, I hope I don't leave you feeling this way. If I did, there's my phone number. There's my private Gmail with my consulting business, or you can get me at knakamura@slco.org, either place. Any questions? And I only took you 8 minutes over. Thank you.